Hey, 42 here. Looking around at the world today, it's hard to imagine another time when there was so much human conflict. All over the media, we're met with a seemingly constant flow of wars, uprising, and politicians making violent threats. Then, of course, there's the internet, a place with more trolls than Middle-earth, and where the average Twitter feed reads like a scene from The Exorcist. It all seems to suggest that, both individually and collectively, we as a species are getting angrier. Which is why you might be surprised to hear that some scholars consider the last 3 decades to have been the most peaceful in human history. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's no fighting, obviously. Even in 2003, at the height of this recent peaceful period, there were more than 30 wars going on around the globe. It's just that our history as a species is riddled with them. In fact, over the last 3,400 years, mankind has lived relatively harmoniously for just 268 orbits around the sun. Basically, only 8% of recorded history has been free of major hostilities. There are prisons with better statistics than that. Beyond the obvious destruction and brutality of the conflict itself, war is full of horrors like the Nazi concentration camps of World War II. But war is also full of stories that reveal the better qualities of humankind. Stories such as this one, about a man who risked everything by volunteering to be sent to Auschwitz. If you love traveling like I do, then you'll love the fastest and easiest VPN, Surfshark. Did you know? Surfshark helps you to avoid price discrimination based on your location, so you can save money on plane tickets and car rentals whilst traveling. Surfshark runs on any device, anywhere, and it's packed full of features, such as industry-leading uncrackable encryption, IP and DNS leak protection, an internet kill switch if your VPN drops out, and 24/7 customer support. Personally, I use Surfshark to watch Netflix content from other countries, such as the US, that's usually blocked here in the UK. It's really easy. All you have to do is switch over your location settings, and there you have it. Access to all your favorite programs. And Surfshark maintains a strict no-logs policy. Their network of 3,200 servers in over 95 countries runs completely on RAM, so they couldn't log your data even if they wanted to. By using the code 42, you'll benefit from an 83% discount, plus 3 extra months for free. All you have to do is click the special link in the description below. Don't miss out. And thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Before it became the most infamous death camp of the biggest war in history, Auschwitz, which is located in Poland, was a detention camp for minority groups and Poles who'd committed the heinous crime of owning land the Nazis wanted. Since Poland's occupiers were fond of mass arrests, there weren't enough spaces in existing jails to house the rapidly growing number of prisoners, so camps like Auschwitz were established. The first train carrying 728 Polish prisoners to the notorious facility arrived in June 1940. Within a few weeks, relatives of those who'd been interned started to receive telegrams informing them of their loved ones' deaths. This terrible turn of events quickly came to the attention of the underground Polish resistance, who decided to investigate. Enter Witold Pilecki, who may be one of the most notable heroes you've never heard of. Don't worry, you're not alone. Even in his native Poland, it was only in the 1990s, after the fall of communism in Poland, that he was first publicly recognized for his remarkable achievements during World War II. Like his comrades in the resistance, Pilecki was intent on discovering what was going on behind those Auschwitz fences. But unlike his brothers and sisters in arms, he decided the best way to do that was to be arrested and sent to the camp. From there, he would be able to report on conditions and organize a prisoner movement to fight back against the Nazis. Of course, he would also be trapped in a place dedicated to brutality and death. But that clearly wasn't a significant enough deterrent to make him change his mind. World War II kicked off with Germany's invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939. And Poland's defense was spirited but short-lived. In fact, the country never officially surrendered. But after Soviet forces invaded from the east on the 17th of September, the battle was clearly lost. Pilecki was ordered to flee his native country, but instead he remains there to continue the underground fight against the invaders. He was responsible for jointly founding one of the first resistance movements, the Secret Polish Army, which was, well, Polish and a secret. At its height, the organisation had close to 20,000 members, and it was eventually absorbed into the Polish Home Army, a colossal underground network of freedom fighters who had no intention of accepting the rule of their new occupiers. On the 19th of September 1940, using fake identity documents, Pilecki allowed himself to be rounded up and arrested by the Nazis. That was the easy part. In those days, all you needed to get yourself arrested was a face. The hard part was still to come, and soon enough, Pilecki was sent to Auschwitz, where he became prisoner 4859. It's hard to imagine what was going through the man's mind when the train first arrived at the camp. No doubt he'd been expecting conditions to be bad, but Auschwitz was still relatively new at the time, and details on what really went on in the camp were scant. Deliberately getting himself arrested was undeniably an incredibly brave thing to do. But in truth, Pilecki would have no idea of the sheer horrors that awaited him in his new life. Not that it took long for him to get a taste. He and his fellow prisoners were beaten with clubs the moment they stepped down from the train. Then their heads were shaved and they were systematically robbed of any possessions they'd managed to bring with them. At one point, 10 men were separated from the group, seemingly at random, and executed on the spot for no apparent reason. Pilecki didn't know it then, but he would spend the next 2.5 years of his life in conditions that most of us would have a hard time even imagining, let alone enduring. He managed to get the first of his many reports out of the camp and back to Home Army HQ not long after his arrival. Many more would follow, usually smuggled out by the few people lucky enough to somehow escape from Auschwitz with their lives. Even a hardened fighting man like Pilecki was shocked by what he encountered at the camp. Horrific abuses from the outset of the facility's operation. Prisoners endured grim punishments, starvation, and the constant threat of death. Pilecki himself was in no way cushioned from the harsh realities of Auschwitz, and he was forced into slave labor along with his fellow prisoners. Like those men and women, he suffered unimaginable hardship. The work was backbreaking, the rations were deliberately pitiful, and disease ravaged the camp on a near constant basis. Pilecki himself battled with at least 3 life-threatening bouts of illness, including pneumonia. Considering what he was going through, you could easily forgive Pilecki for forgetting about his mission altogether, to dedicate all his attention to trying to survive. But this man was made of stern stuff, and, showing incredible courage, he formed a prisoners' resistance movement known as the ZOW. The organisation was designed to improve morale amongst the prisoners by sourcing extra food, clothing, and even medical supplies. At the same time, Pilecki set up intelligence networks to collect useful information and send it to those on the outside. The group was organised in such a way that no senior member knew the identity of his peers, meaning that, should anyone be caught, they would be physically unable to give up their comrades, no matter what unspeakable torture they were subjected to. Under Pilecki's leadership, the group united and absorbed all other resistance movements in Auschwitz, eventually growing to include over 1,000 members from the many different areas of the camp. During Pilecki's imprisonment, he would become the principal source of information about the camp and chief witness to the changes it would undergo. His reports were sent to the Home Army, and from there on to the exiled Polish government in London and senior figures amongst the Allies. Pilecki's accounts detailed the atrocities being committed at the camp, the mass exterminations, the starvation, the casual brutality of the guards, and the twisted experiments that were being carried out on Auschwitz inmates. He also did his best to provide cold, hard figures: the total number of prisoners, the frequency and volume of new arrivals, and his best approximation of the number of deaths. A figure that would eventually top 1 million souls. The Allied powers initially believed these reports were being somehow exaggerated. What happened at Auschwitz was quite literally unbelievable. But the reports kept on coming, and the atrocities they depicted only continued to grow, both in scale and depravity. Pileski hoped the intelligence he was gathering would lead to some kind of liberation or support for his fellow prisoners, but as we now know, that wasn't to be. The ZOW continued to grow until the spring of 1942, but by the autumn of the same year, the Gestapo had managed to root out and kill many of its members. Some close colleagues of Pileski's were arrested, and camp authorities made the decision to transfer older Polish prisoners to camps in Germany, so as to further disrupt the resistance group. Pileski knew this could only end badly, and he believed he'd be able to convince the Home Army to mount a rescue operation, if only he could speak to his superiors in person. Of course, there was only one way to do that. He was going to have to escape from Auschwitz. Prisoners at the camp were beaten, humiliated, and very often executed even for minor infractions, and often for no reason at all. Being caught attempting to escape was quite simply a death sentence. But if he wanted to help his fellow prisoners, Pileski had no choice but to try. So, one April night in 1943, he and two of his fellow prisoners pried open a metal door at the bakery where they were working the night shift. Despite their weakened state, they were able to subdue a guard before locking him in a woodshed. They also had the presence of mind to sever a phone line and disable an alarm before escaping on foot, taking stolen German identity documents with them. It would be several days, almost 100 kilometers, and at least one close call with German soldiers, during which Pileski was shot and wounded, before the men reached the security of a Home Army safe house outside occupied Warsaw. There, Pileski started work on what's now known as Witold's Report, which focused on the ZOW and his experiences in Auschwitz. The purpose of the report was to convince the Home Army to attempt to liberate the camp, but the organisation concluded that even if they were to attack Auschwitz, they didn't have the resources to transport the prisoners to safety. Despite the setback, Pileski continued the fight for both the resistance and for his former inmates in Auschwitz, coordinating activities between the ZOW and the Home Army as best as he could. By February 1944, he was promoted to the rank of captain, and in the summer of the following year, he took part in the Warsaw Uprising, during which the Home Army attempted to oust the occupying Germans. Pileski was actually supposed to remain out of harm's way during the uprising, but true to form, he entered the conflict anonymously and fought as a regular soldier. Unsurprisingly, he excelled, and as Polish casualties began to mount, he revealed his true identity and rank to his superior officers, who immediately put him in command of his own unit. After 63 days of brutal fighting, the Warsaw Uprising ended in failure, and Pileski was one of the many Poles forced to surrender to the Nazis. He was taken to a POW camp in Bavaria, where he would spend the rest of the war until the camp's liberation in April 1945. But whilst the Second World War came to an end for most people in 1945, things were a little different in Poland. Red Army soldiers still occupied the country, and Stalin orchestrated the installation of a Soviet-backed puppet government that transformed Poland into little more than a vassal state of the Soviet Union. After a brief stint in Italy, Pileski was ordered to go undercover in his native country to gather intelligence on the activities of the occupying Soviets. Arriving in Warsaw in December 1945, he recruited members from the ZOW and the Home Army to form a new intelligence network. Though it was probably a walk in the park compared to Auschwitz, Pileski's time undercover was still incredibly dangerous, and he was forced to change identities and jobs on a regular basis in order to avoid discovery. Those precautions worked for a while, but in 1946, he received a tip-off that his cover had been compromised. He was ordered to pull out of Poland immediately. But he refused to abandon his homeland. Pilecki was arrested by the Soviets on the 8th of May 1947. He was interrogated and tortured for upwards of a year by men who were well known for their cruelty, but he never talked. When it became clear he wasn't going to give up any valuable information on the Polish resistance, Pilecki was put on trial, where he was accused of a battery of charges against a puppet state, including illegal border crossing, the use of forged documents, espionage, and planning to assassinate several senior politicians. He pleaded guilty to all but 2 of the charges. He denied espionage on the grounds that he was an officer of the 2nd Polish Corps, and therefore wasn't breaking any laws. And he denied the charge of planning assassinations for the simple reason that they weren't true. Not that any of it mattered. The trial was a sham, and there was only going to ever be one outcome. Pilecki was found guilty on all counts. He was executed on the 25th of May, 1948. To this day, nobody knows where his body is buried. Until 1989, Captain Pilecki's remarkable story was censored in Poland. But after the collapse of communism, his trial was officially reviewed and the sentence quashed. In 1995, he was posthumously awarded the Order of Polonia Restituta, and in 2006, the Order of the White Eagle, the highest decoration in all of Poland. These medals probably wouldn't have meant much to a man who had fought so bravely for his country's liberty, but still, it does feel like justice was eventually served. Thanks for watching.